The Wyoming sun hung low like a copper coin against the endless sky, casting long shadows across the parched grasslands. Samuel McKenna rode alone through the valley, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite the ache that had settled into his bones these past 3 years. The ranch lay another hour west, but he was in no hurry. An empty house held little appeal for a man who'd once filled it with laughter. His horse, a sturdy bay named Cherokee, picked its way through the sagebrush with practiced ease. The September wind carried the scent of distant rain and dying grass. Samuel pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the slanted light. At 42, he'd built an empire from nothing: 10,000 head of cattle, water rights that stretched for miles, and enough gold in the bank to buy half of Cheyenne. Yet he'd traded all for one more sunset with Margaret and little Emma. The abandoned homestead appeared like a broken tooth against the horizon. Samuel had passed it a dozen times since the Johnsons gave up and headed back east. Another family crushed by the harshness of frontier life. He would have ridden past again, but Cherokee's ears pricked forward, and the horse slowed without being asked. Then he heard a sound so faint it might have been the wind through the rotting boards. But no, there it was again, a muffled cry, desperate and raw. Samuel dismounted, his hand moving instinctively to the colt at his hip. The door of the shack hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, shadows pooled thick as oil. He stepped carefully, boots crunching on broken glass and debris. "Hello," his voice echoed in the emptiness. The sound came again, from the corner where old grain sacks lay piled. Samuel crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled them aside. What he found there stopped his breath cold in his chest. A young woman lay bound with rough rope, a filthy cloth tied across her mouth. Her dress, once blue, was torn and stained with dirt and blood. But it was her eyes that hit him like a physical blow, wide, terrified. The exact shade of cornflower blue that Margaret's had been. "I can't breathe," she managed to gasp as he fumbled with the gag, her voice barely a whisper. "Please." Samuel's hands trembled as he worked the knot loose. When he finally pulled the cloth away, she gulped air like a drowning person breaking the surface. The sound of her desperate breathing filled the shack, and for a moment, he was back in another room, 3 years ago, listening to Margaret fight for each breath as the fever took her. "Easy now," he said, forcing his voice steady as he cut through the ropes with his knife. "You're safe." She tried to sit up and fell back, too weak to support herself. Samuel caught her before she hit the floor, and the weight of her in his arms brought another rush of memory. Emma had been so light at the end, like a bird made of paper and air. "Water," the girl whispered. He retrieved his canteen from Cherokee's saddle and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her hands shaking as she tried to help hold it steady. In the fading light, he could see the rope burns on her wrists, the bruises darkening her face. "How long?" he asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw from screaming. "They said they'd come back for me, said I'd fetch a good price in Denver." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of such things, women disappearing from farms and towns, never to be seen again, but he'd thought they were just stories, the kind of tales men told to keep their daughters close to home. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "I won't go back. I'll die first." "Nobody's dying today," Samuel said. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. "My ranch is an hour west. We'll get you somewhere safe. Get the doc to look at you." Outside, Cherokee stood patient as a saint. Samuel lifted the girl into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She sagged against his chest, and he wrapped one arm around her to keep her from falling. "What's your name?" he asked as they started west. "Grace," she murmured. "Grace Patterson, from Illinois originally." "Well, Miss Patterson, I'm Samuel McKenna. You just hold on now. We'll be home soon." The word home felt strange on his tongue. The Double M Ranch hadn't been home since Margaret died, just a place to sleep between sunrise and sunset, But as they rode through the gathering dusk, Grace's weight warm against him. Something stirred in his chest that he'd thought was buried with his family. "They'll come looking," Grace said suddenly, her voice stronger now. "The men who took me, they won't just let me go." "Let them come," Samuel said, and meant it. For 3 years he'd been a ghost haunting his own life, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. Now, feeling the girl tremble in his arms, seeing the marks of cruelty on her skin, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: anger. Clean, righteous anger that burned away the numbness like fire through dry grass. The ranch buildings appeared in the distance, lamplight glowing in the windows where his foreman Jake would be finishing supper. Samuel urged Cherokee to a faster pace, eager now to get Grace to safety. He didn't know who had taken her or why, but one thing was certain: they'd made a mistake leaving her where Samuel McKenna would find her. As they rode through the gate, Jake emerged from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, until he recognized Samuel's silhouette. "Boss, that you?" "Get Martha," Samuel called. "And send someone for Doc Morrison. Tell him to come quick." Jake took one look at the unconscious girl in Samuel's arms and ran for the main house. Within minutes, the ranch came alive with activity. Martha, the housekeeper who'd stayed on after Margaret's death, took charge with the efficiency of a battlefield nurse. "Poor child," she clucked, helping Samuel carry Grace into the house. "What's been done to her?" "Nothing good," Samuel said grimly. "She needs care, Martha, and we need to be ready for trouble." As they settled Grace into the guest room, Samuel found himself standing in the doorway, reluctant to leave, in the lamplight, cleaned up and resting on clean sheets. She looked even younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 20, no more than 22. The same age Margaret had been when they'd met. "You did a good thing, Mr. McKenna," Martha said softly, laying a hand on his arm. "The Lord put you on that trail for a reason." Samuel wasn't sure he believed in the Lord's plan anymore, not after what had been taken from him, but looking at Grace Patterson's battered face, remembering the terror in her eyes, he knew he'd ride through hell itself before he'd let anyone hurt her again. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over the ranch like a blanket. Somewhere out there, evil men were probably discovering their captive was gone. They'd come looking, just as Grace had warned, but they'd find more than they bargained for at the Double M. Samuel McKenna had been dead inside for 3 years. Now, finally, he had a reason to come back to life. Grace Patterson woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the smell of fresh bread. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the pain in her wrists brought it all back: the men, the ropes, the endless hours in that abandoned shack thinking she would die there. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. Martha's kind face appeared above her, lined with concern. "You've been sleeping 2 days straight. Doc Morrison said your body needed the rest." 2 days. Grace tried to sit up, panic flashing through her. "The men!" "Haven't shown their faces around here," Martha assured her, helping her sit against the pillows. "Mr. McKenna's got men watching the roads. You're safe as houses." Safe. The word felt foreign on Grace's tongue. She hadn't been safe since leaving Illinois 6 months ago, full of dreams about teaching school in California. The wagon train attack, her father's death, being sold to those monsters, it all seemed like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. "I need to speak with Mr. McKenna," Grace said. "I need to thank him." Martha's expression softened. "He's been checking on you regular. Sits outside that door half the night like a guard dog. Haven't seen him care about anything that much since—" She stopped herself. "Well, I'll fetch him for you." While Martha bustled out, Grace took stock of her surroundings. The room was simple but clean, with good furniture and a painting of mountains on the wall. Through the window, she could see cattle grazing in the distance and men working around the corrals. A real ranch, prosperous and well-run, nothing like the hardscrabble farms she'd known. Samuel McKenna appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, In daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time, tall and broad-shouldered, with premature silver threading through dark hair and lines carved deep around gray eyes. A man who'd known both success and sorrow. "Miss Patterson," he said, "good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Alive," she said simply. "Thanks to you." He shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Grace said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most would have ridden on by." She met his eyes directly. "I owe you my life, Mr. McKenna. But I need to tell you something. Those men, they're not going to give up easily. I'm trouble you don't need." Samuel pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Why don't you tell me what happened, all of it?" So Grace told him about the wagon train from Independence, attacked by what everyone thought were Indians but turned out to be white men dressed up, about watching her father die trying to protect her, about being taken with 3 other women to a camp in the hills. "They run girls west," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "To mining camps, to Denver, even to California. They've got buyers everywhere and protection from—" She hesitated. "From who?" Samuel's voice had gone hard as granite. "Judge Thornton in Cheyenne. Sheriff Wallace, too. Maybe others. I heard them talking when they thought I was unconscious. They've been doing this for years." Samuel stood abruptly and paced to the window. Grace watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his fists clenched and unclenched. "The other women?" he asked without turning. "What happened to them?" "Gone. Sold off one by one. I was being saved for someone special. They said, someone in Denver who likes—" She couldn't finish. "You don't have to say more," Samuel said quickly. He turned back to her, and she was surprised to see not pity in his eyes, but rage, carefully controlled. "How did you end up in that shack?" "I fought back, bit one of them bad enough to draw blood. They beat me for it, then left me there to learn my lesson while they went to town. Said I'd be more cooperative after a few days without food or water." "Do you know their names?" Grace nodded. "The leader calls himself Dutch Williams, tall man with a scar through his eyebrow. The others were Colby, Red Mike, and someone they called Teacher Thin Man with spectacles who kept the books." Samuel committed the names to memory. "Miss Patterson, I need to ask you something. Do you have family anywhere? Someone we could contact?" "No one." The words came out smaller than she intended. "My mother died when I was 12. Pa was all I had. I was going to California to teach school, start fresh. I have a certificate from the normal school in Springfield." She laughed bitterly. It was in my trunk. We'll get you another one." Samuel said. The certainty in his voice surprised them both. "But first, we deal with Dutch Williams and his men." "You can't," Grace protested. "You don't understand. They own the law. They've killed men who've tried to stop them. I won't have your death on my conscience." Samuel moved back to the chair, leaning forward. "Miss Patterson, Grace, let me tell you something. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter to scarlet fever. Couldn't save them, no matter how much money I had or how hard I prayed. I've been walking around half dead ever since. Just going through the motions." His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Finding you in that shack woke something up in me. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was purpose. I don't know, but I do know this: I've got money, men, and nothing left to lose. If Dutch Williams wants a fight, he'll get one." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you how it's going to be. You're under my protection now. You'll stay here until you're healed up and ready to decide what comes next. If William shows his face, we'll handle it." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. After months of fear and degradation, this man's matter-of-fact protection broke through her defenses like nothing else could have. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered. "Then don't," Samuel said, standing. "Just get your strength back. Martha will see to anything you need." He paused at the door. "One more thing. Can you handle a gun?" Grace thought of her father teaching her to shoot bottles off fence posts back in Illinois. A rifle. Pa taught me. Good. When you're feeling up to it, we'll get you armed. Way I see it, a woman should be able to protect herself out here. After he left, Grace lay back against the pillows, her mind spinning. She'd expected to die in that shack. Instead, she'd been delivered into the hands of a man who looked at her bruises and saw not damaged goods, but someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. Outside her window, she could see Samuel McKenna talking to his men, gesturing toward the horizon. Whatever storm was coming, he was preparing for it. For the first time since the attack on the wagon train, Grace felt something besides fear and despair. She felt hope. That evening, Martha brought her supper on a tray beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Grace ate slowly, savoring each bite after days of starvation. Through the open window, she could hear the normal sounds of ranch life men calling to each other, horses nickering, the lowing of cattle. "Mr. McKenna asked if you felt up to joining us for breakfast tomorrow," Martha said, collecting the empty dishes. "No pressure, mind you, but he thought you might like some company." "I'd like that," Grace said. She hesitated, then asked, "Martha, what happened to his family?" The older woman's face grew sad. "Scarlet fever swept through 3 years back, took little Emma, first sweetest child you ever saw, only 6 years old, Mrs. Margaret followed 2 days later. Mr. McKenna near died himself, but his body was stronger." She shook her head. "Sometimes I think that was the cruelest part. He lived, but the light went out of him. Until now." "Until now." Martha gave her a knowing look. "First time in 3 years I've seen him care about anything beyond cattle prices and water rights. You've given him something to fight for. Child, that's no small thing." Long after Martha left, Grace sat by the window watching the stars come out over the vast Wyoming sky. Somewhere out there, Dutch Williams was probably discovering she was gone. He'd come for her, she knew it in her bones. But for tonight, she was safe behind the walls of the Double M Ranch, protected by a man who understood loss and refused to let it happen again. She thought of her father's last words. "Be strong, Gracie, find good people." Maybe, against all odds, she had... The riders came at dusk on the 5th day, their silhouettes dark against the dying light. Samuel watched them from the ranch house porch, his Winchester resting easy in his hands. Jake stood beside him, along with 6 other men, all armed and ready. 4 riders, Jake murmured. "Coming slow and steady." "They want us to see them coming," Samuel said. "Want us to know they're not afraid." Grace appeared in the doorway behind them, wearing a borrowed dress and boots Martha had found for her. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, but her eyes were clear and determined. "It's them," she said quietly. "The one in front is Dutch Williams." "Get back inside," Samuel said without turning. "No," her voice was firm. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid." Samuel wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. She'd earned the right to face her demons. The riders stopped just outside the ranch gate, making no move to enter. Dutch Williams was exactly as Grace had described, tall in the saddle with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The others flanked him, a red-haired giant who must be Red Mike, a thin man with spectacles, and a younger fellow with mean eyes. "Evening, McKenna," Dutch called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Fine ranch you got here. Hear you found something belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you," Samuel replied evenly. Dutch smiled, a cold thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Now, that's where you're wrong. The girl's bought and paid for. Got a buyer in Denver expecting delivery. Bad business to disappoint paying customers." "The girl has a name." Grace stepped forward, moving to stand beside Samuel. "And I belong to no one." Dutch's eyebrows raised slightly. Well, well. Little bird found her voice. That's good, buyer likes them spirited. Now be a smart girl and come along peaceful. Save everyone a lot of trouble." "The only trouble here is you." Samuel said, "Turn around and ride out. Don't come back." Dutch leaned forward in his saddle. "You know who I am. McKenna. Know who backs my play. I know you're a slaver and a coward who preys on defenseless women. Don't much care who you've bought in Cheyenne." The thin man with spectacles, teacher, spoke up. "Mr. McKenna, you're a businessman. Surely we can come to an arrangement. The girl cost us considerable investment. We'd be willing to accept compensation. The only thing you'll get from me is a bullet if you're still here in 1 minute." Samuel cut him off. Red Mike's hand drifted toward his gun. "Big talk for a cowpusher." Jake and the other men raised their rifles in unison. The metallic sound of 7 weapons being cocked echoed in the evening air. "Thing about cowpushers," Jake drawled, "is we're real good at protecting what's ours. And Miss Grace here, she's under Mr. McKenna's protection now." Dutch's smile never wavered, but his eyes went hard. "Judge Thornton won't be happy about this. Neither will Sheriff Wallace. You're making powerful enemies, McKenna." "Had worse," Samuel said simply. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as fence wire. Then Dutch laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Have it your way. But this ain't over. That girl knows things, seen things. Can't have her running her mouth in town. Bad for business, you understand?" "What I understand," Samuel said, "is that you've got 30 seconds left." Dutch tipped his hat mockingly. "We'll be seeing you, McKenna, real soon. And next time, we won't come talking." He wheeled his horse around, and the others followed. They rode off slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone knew they weren't running. "They'll be back," Jake said once they were out of sight. "With more men." "I know," Samuel replied. He turned to Grace. "You did good, standing up to him." She was trembling slightly, but her chin was high. "I meant what I said. I'm done being afraid. But Jake's right, they'll come back with an army. Dutch doesn't like being told no." "How many men does he have?" Samuel asked. "Maybe 15, 20 altogether. But it's not just the numbers. It's the protection. Judge Thornton will issue warrants, make you the criminal. Sheriff Wallace will deputize Dutch's men. They've done it before." Samuel considered this. In a straight fight, his men could hold the ranch. But if the law was against them, it got complicated. You couldn't shoot deputies and judges without consequences, no matter how corrupt they were. "We need help," he said finally. "Jake, send Tom to Fort Laramie. I've got a friend there, Captain Morrison. Tell him what's happening. Then send Billy to the Circle J and the Rocking H. Old Man Henderson and Carl Jameson have no love for Judge Thornton. Maybe they'll stand with us." "What about the law?" Grace asked. "There's law and there's justice," Samuel said. "They're not always the same thing, but there's one judge Dutch can't buy federal judge in Denver. If we can get evidence, testimony, we might have a chance." Grace touched his arm. "You're risking everything for me. Your ranch, your life. I can't—" "Yes, you can," Samuel said firmly. "My wife used to say that evil grows when good people do nothing. I've been doing nothing for 3 years. Time that changed." That night, they prepared for war. Samuel posted guards around the ranch, doubled the watch on the roads. He cleaned and loaded every weapon in the house, showing Grace how to use the shotgun easier than a rifle in close quarters. "If they get past us, you barricade yourself in the root cellar," he instructed. "It's got stone walls, one way in. You can hold it until help comes." "And if help doesn't come?" Samuel met her eyes. "It will." Later, as Grace helped Martha prepare supper for the men, the older woman said, "Haven't seen Mr. McKenna like this in years. It's like he's come back to life." Grace understood. She'd felt dead herself these past months, just existing from one horror to the next. But standing up to Dutch, refusing to cower, it had awakened something in her too. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was just anger. But it felt better than the numbness. After supper, she found Samuel on the porch, staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, joining him. "Never could before a fight. Margaret used to say I'd worry the storm into being if I wasn't careful." "Tell me about her," Grace said softly. "If you don't mind." Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "She was a school teacher in Kansas when I met her. Prettiest thing I'd ever seen, and smart as a whip. Took me 6 months to work up the courage to court her proper. Her father thought she was crazy, marrying a rancher with nothing but dreams and a quarter section of land. But she did anyway. Said she'd rather have adventure with me than safety with someone else. We built this place together, board by board. When Emma came along, Margaret said our family was complete. She was right. It was perfect. Until it wasn't." Grace heard the pain in his voice, recognized it as kin to her own. "I'm sorry." "So am I. But sorry doesn't change anything. Only thing that matters is what we do next." A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, and others answered. Grace shivered. "They sound closer than usual," she said. "Everything's closer than usual tonight," Samuel replied. "Storm's coming, one way or another. Question is, are we ready for it?" Grace thought about the man who'd found her in that shack, who'd given her shelter and protection without asking anything in return, who was willing to risk his life and fortune for a stranger because it was right. "We're ready," she said, and meant it. Samuel looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in the darkness. Not quite hope, but maybe the promise of it. "Yes," he said quietly, "I believe we are." Inside the house, Martha watched them through the window and allowed herself a small smile. The good Lord worked in mysterious ways, bringing these two broken souls together. Maybe they'd save each other, or maybe Dutch Williams would kill them all by week's end. Either way, Martha thought, at least they were fighting, at least they were alive. After 3 years of watching Samuel merely exist, that was miracle enough. The night deepened, and somewhere out there, Dutch Williams was gathering his forces. But on the Double M Ranch, 2 wounded people had found something worth defending each other, and the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. The real battle was yet to come. The streets of Cheyenne were bustling with afternoon traffic when Samuel McKenna rode in with Jake and 2 other men. Grace had wanted to come, but Samuel convinced her to stay at the ranch. "Too dangerous," he'd said, though they both knew it was more than that. Dutch Williams had eyes everywhere in town. Samuel headed straight for the bank, needing to wire money to Denver for legal counsel. But as he dismounted, Sheriff Wallace stepped out of the shadows, badge glinting in the sun. "McKenna," Wallace said, hand resting on his pistol. "Judge wants to see you." "Judge Thornton can wait," Samuel replied. "I've got business." "Wasn't a request." 2 deputies materialized behind Wallace, both looking like they'd enjoy any excuse to draw their guns. Jake tensed, but Samuel raised a hand slightly. "No point in a shootout on Main Street." "Lead the way, Sheriff." The courthouse sat at the end of town, a 2-story brick building that represented law and order to most folks. Samuel knew better. Inside these walls, justice was bought and sold like cattle. Judge Thornton's office was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. The judge himself sat behind a massive desk, a heavy-set man with gray whiskers and cold eyes. Dutch Williams stood by the window, smirking. "Mr. McKenna," Thornton began without preamble, "I understand you're harboring a fugitive." "I'm giving shelter to a kidnapped woman," Samuel corrected. "That's not how Mr. Williams tells it. He says the woman is an indentured servant who broke her contract. He has papers." Dutch produced a document with a flourish. Samuel didn't need to examine it to know it was forged. "Those papers aren't worth the ink they're written with," Samuel said flatly. Thornton's face reddened. "I'll decide what's legal in my jurisdiction. McKenna, you'll turn the woman over to the rightful authorities, or I'll issue a warrant for your arrest." On what charge? Theft of property, interfering with lawful commerce, harboring a fugitive. Take your pick. Samuel studied both men, seeing the corruption written plain on their faces. How much is Dutch paying you? Judge, what's the going rate for selling young women these days? The room went deadly quiet. Wallace's hand tightened on his gun. Careful, McKenna, Thornton warned. That sounds dangerously close to slander. Truth isn't slander, Samuel replied. And here's another truth I've sent word to the federal authorities in Denver. The U.S. Marshal's office takes a dim view of slavery, even the kind you dress up with fake papers. Dutch's smirk faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? I've also contacted the newspaper in Denver. Imagine the headlines, Wyoming judge involved in white slave trade. Won't look good when you're up for re-election. Thornton. The judge stood, face purple with rage. You dare threaten me, I'll have you arrested right now. Try it, Samuel said calmly. But know this, I've left letters with people you can't reach. If anything happens to me or Miss Patterson, those letters go straight to Denver. Names, dates. Every girl who's disappeared in the last 2 years. Did you know Grace has an excellent memory? She remembers every conversation she overheard. It was partly bluff, but he saw it hit home. Dutch and Thornton exchanged glances. You're making a mistake, McKenna. Dutch said, We're offering you a way out. Walk away. Let us handle our business, and nobody gets hurt. I've got a counteroffer. Samuel said, You leave Wyoming territory. Tonight. Don't come back. Take your men and your dirty business somewhere else. Dutch laughed. Or what? You'll shoot it out with the whole town. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and now you're outside the law. Maybe, but I'm not alone. Samuel moved to the window, gesturing down at the street. Below, a dozen riders sat their horses in front of the courthouse. Carl Jameson from the Rocking H, Old Man Henderson from the Circle J, and their best men, all armed, all watching the courthouse with steady eyes. Other ranchers are tired of girls disappearing, Samuel continued. Tired of corrupt law that only serves those who can pay. You might take some of us down, but not all. And when the smoke clears, you'll be finished in Wyoming. Thornton sank back in his chair, calculating. Samuel could see the wheels turning. How much was Dutch's operation worth versus the risk of a range war? Get out of my office, the judge said finally. But this isn't over, McKenna. You can't protect that girl forever. Watch me, Samuel said. Outside, Carl Jameson tipped his hat. Trouble. Sam. Nothing we can't handle, Samuel replied. But his mind was already working. They'd bought time, but not much. Dutch wouldn't give up easily. And Thornton had too much invested to back down. Appreciate you coming, Samuel told the other ranchers. Been meaning to deal with this snake's nest for a while. Henderson spat tobacco juice into the street. My foreman's daughter went missing last spring. Now I know why. As they prepared to ride out, Samuel noticed something that made his blood chill. Across the street, partially hidden in an alley, stood 3 women, young, hollow-eyed, dressed in cheap finery. One met his gaze for just a moment before a rough hand yanked her back into the shadows. Jake, he said quietly. See that? I see it, boss. Dutch is still operating, bold as brass. Samuel's jaw clenched. It wasn't enough to protect Grace. This whole rotten system needed to come down. They were halfway back to the ranch when they saw the smoke, a black column rising into the clear sky, coming from the direction of the Henderson place. Fire! Someone shouted, and they spurred their horses into a gallop. The Henderson line shack was fully engulfed when they arrived, flames licking at the sky. No way to save it. But that wasn't what made Samuel's heart sink. Pinned to a fence post was a message. This is what happens to those who interfere. The girl by sundown tomorrow, or the Double M burns next. Old Man Henderson's face was granite. They fired on my land. That's declaration of war. They want us angry. Samuel said, "Want us to do something stupid." "So, what do we do?" Jameson asked. Samuel looked at the burning building, thinking of Grace back at the ranch, of those hollow-eyed girls in town, of all the families torn apart by Dutch's greed. "We do something smart," he said. "Jake, ride to Fort Laramie. Tell Captain Morrison we need help now. Carl, can you spare men to guard the other ranches?" "Already planning on it," Jameson said. "And someone needs to get word to that federal judge in Denver. Real word. Not through regular channels. Thornton probably has people watching the telegraph office." "I'll handle that," Henderson said. "My nephew lives in Denver. He can deliver a message personal-like." As they organized their response, Samuel felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just about protecting Grace anymore. It was about standing up to a system that treated people as property, that corrupted law and justice for profit. Back at the ranch, Grace was waiting on the porch, Martha beside her. She took one look at their faces and knew. "They're escalating," she said. It wasn't a question. "Burned Henderson's line shack. Left a message." Samuel dismounted, moving to stand before her. "They want you by tomorrow, or they'll burn us out." Grace's chin lifted. "Then we'd better get ready for fire." "I could send you away," Samuel said quietly. "Get you on a train to California, somewhere safe." "No." The word came out firm as bedrock. "I'm done running. These men need to be stopped. And I'm the only witness who can identify them all. Who knows their operations? If I run now, they'll just find other girls to hurt." Samuel studied her face, seeing the fear there, but also the determination. Margaret would have liked her, he thought suddenly, would have admired her courage. "Then we make our stand," he said, "together." That night, they prepared for siege. Every available water barrel was filled, wet blankets ready to fight fire. The women Grace, Martha, and the foreman's wife prepared bandages and loaded ammunition. The men took positions around the ranch, creating overlapping fields of fire. As darkness fell, Grace found Samuel checking the defenses one last time. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of dying, of failing, of letting them take you." "You won't," she said simply. "I have faith in you. Samuel McKenna." It was the first time she'd used his given name. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of what they were building together, not just a defense against evil, but perhaps something more. "When this is over," Samuel began, then stopped. "When this is over," Grace said softly, "we'll have time to say everything that needs saying." He nodded, understanding. First, they had to survive tomorrow. As if reading his thoughts, Grace checked the load on the shotgun he'd given her. "They're going to learn something about us tomorrow." "What's that?" Her smile was fierce. "That some things are worth fighting for, and some people don't scare easy." Looking at her bruised but unbroken, afraid but unbowed, Samuel believed her. Dutch Williams had made a fundamental mistake. He'd thought them weak, isolated, easy prey. Tomorrow, he'd learn different. The storm hit just after midnight, rolling down from the mountains with terrible fury. Lightning split the sky while thunder shook the ranch buildings. Rain fell in sheets, turning the ground to mud within minutes. Samuel stood at the window of his study, watching nature's violence with grim satisfaction. Dutch wouldn't attack in this weather. The storm bought them time, but it also meant they couldn't expect help from Fort Laramie or the other ranches until it passed. Can't sleep either. He turned to find Grace in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. The lamplight caught the rain on the windows, casting moving shadows across her face. "Storm's keeping everyone awake," Samuel said. "Coffee." She nodded, and they moved to the kitchen. The house felt different with the storm raging outside, smaller, more intimate. As Samuel poured coffee from the pot Martha always kept warm, lightning illuminated the yard, showing the ranch hands huddled in the bunkhouse. "Tell me about Emma," Grace said suddenly, "if you don't mind." Samuel's hand stilled for a moment, then resumed pouring. "What would you like to know?" "What was she like?" He handed her the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "Wild as a Mustang and twice as stubborn. Margaret used to say she got that from me." A smile ghosted across his face. "She loved storms. Would stand at the window just like I was doing, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Samuel sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Every morning, she'd come running into our room, jump on the bed. 'Papa, is it an adventure day?' she'd ask." Every day was an adventure to Emma. Grace reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry you lost them." "So am I. But lately." He turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Lately, I've been thinking maybe they wouldn't want me to die with them. Maybe saving you was Emma's way of telling me it's time to live again." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. They laughed, tension breaking. "Some protector I am," Samuel said. "Scared of thunder." "I won't tell the men," Grace promised, smiling. Then her expression grew serious. "Samuel, I need to tell you something about what I overheard in Dutch's camp." He squeezed her hand. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Dutch isn't just running girls west. He's got a buyer in San Francisco, a man named Kellerman, who ships them overseas, to China, the Philippines, places where white women bring high prices. Once they're on those ships..." She shuddered. Samuel's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds over the years. Dutch keeps records, names, dates, prices. He's proud of his business. The ledger is in a safe at the Thornton place. If we could get that." "Evidence," Samuel said. "Enough to bring federal authorities running." "But it's impossible. The house is guarded, and the safe..." Lightning flashed again, and in that instant of brilliance, Samuel made a decision. "Not impossible, just difficult." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her to his study, to a painting of the ranch that hung behind his desk. Moving it aside revealed a wall safe. Inside, along with property deeds and cash, was something that made Grace gasp. "Is that..." "A Pinkerton badge," Samuel confirmed. "From another life. Before I met Margaret, I spent 5 years working for the agency. Learned a few things about getting into places I wasn't supposed to be." Grace stared at him. "You were a detective?" "Among other things, it's how I made the money to buy this place. Alan Pinkerton himself tried to talk me out of leaving. Said I was the best he had at undercover work." Samuel touched the badge. "Haven't thought about those days in years." "Could you do it, get into Thornton's safe?" "Maybe, but not alone." He looked at her intently. "It would be dangerous. If we're caught..." "We won't be," Grace said firmly. "When?" "Tomorrow night. The storm will have passed, but everyone will be focused on the ranch, waiting for Dutch's deadline. Nobody will expect us to go on the offensive." They spent the next hour planning. Grace knew the layout of Thornton's house from overhearing Dutch's men talk. The judge had a weakness for whiskey and women every Thursday night. He visited a certain establishment in town, staying until dawn. "That's tomorrow," Grace realized. "Providence," Samuel said. "Or luck, either way. We'll take it." As the storm began to weaken, Grace stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Samuel, what you said about living again." He waited. "I'm glad you're choosing life, and I'm..." She paused, searching for words. "I'm glad it includes me." After she left, Samuel stood in his study for a long time, listening to the dying storm. He touched his chest where his heart beat steadily, a heart he'd thought dead until a desperate girl's cry had awakened it. The next day dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Samuel put Jake in charge of the ranch defenses, telling him only that he had business in town that couldn't wait. "What kind of business?" Jake asked suspiciously. "The kind that might end this without bloodshed." Grace appeared at the stable as Samuel was saddling Cherokee. She wore men's clothing pants, shirt and hat that shadowed her face. "Where did you—" "Martha said they belonged to a hand who left them behind. They fit well enough." She moved to saddle one of the other horses with practiced ease. "You don't have to come," Samuel said. "I could—" "We're partners in this," Grace interrupted. "I'm coming." They rode out as the sun was setting, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main roads. The Thornton mansion sat on the edge of town, a 3-story testament to corruption's rewards. As they'd hoped, the place was mostly dark, just a few lights in the servants' quarters. They hid their horses in a grove of cottonwoods and approached on foot. Samuel still moved like a Pinkerton, silent and sure. Grace followed, her heart hammering but her hands steady. The study window was where Grace had said it would be. Samuel worked the lock with tools he'd kept all these years, muscle memory returning. Within minutes, they were inside. The safe sat behind another painting Thornton wasn't original. Samuel knelt before it, ear pressed to the metal, fingers working the dial. Grace kept watch at the door, shotgun ready. "Hurry," she whispered. "Can't rush this," Samuel murmured. Then click, the safe swung open. Inside were stacks of money, gold coins, and 3 leather-bound ledgers. Samuel grabbed all 3, stuffing them into a saddlebag he'd brought. "Someone's coming," Grace hissed. Footsteps in the hallway. Samuel closed the safe, spun the dial, and they dove behind the heavy desk just as the door opened. A servant entered, carrying a brandy decanter. He refilled the glass on the desk, muttering about master's specific instructions, then left. They waited, counting heartbeats, then slipped back out the window. Not until they were back in the cottonwoods did either speak. "Got them," Samuel breathed. 3 years of records. Grace threw her arms around him, and suddenly they were kissing, desperate, alive, tasting storm and danger and possibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should go," Grace said, but she was smiling. They rode hard for the ranch, the ledgers burning like fire in Samuel's saddlebags. Dawn was breaking as they arrived, and Jake ran out to meet them. "Boss, where have you?" He stopped, taking in their wind-blown appearance and Grace's men's clothes. "Never mind. You need to see this." He led them to the main house where Captain Morrison from Fort Laramie waited with a dozen cavalrymen. "Sam," Morrison said. "Got your message. Also got word from the U.S. Marshal's office. They're sending men, but it'll take days. What's the situation?" Samuel pulled out the ledgers. "Better than it was an hour ago." Morrison whistled low as he flipped through the pages. Names, dates, prices paid, destinations, everything needed to destroy Dutch's operation and everyone connected to it. "This changes things," Morrison said. "With this evidence, I can arrest Thornton and Wallace immediately. Military authority supersedes local in cases of trafficking." "Dutch?" Grace asked. "Him too, if we can find him." As if in answer, one of the ranch hands shouted from the wall, "Riders coming, lots of them!" Dutch Williams had arrived with nearly 20 men, ready for war. What he found instead was Captain Morrison's cavalry unit in full formation, and federal warrants for his arrest. The standoff was brief, faced with trained soldiers instead of cowboys. Half of Dutch's men threw down their guns immediately. Dutch himself tried to run, wheeling his horse toward the hills. It was Grace who stopped him, stepping out with a shotgun Samuel had given her. She fired both barrels into the ground right in front of Dutch's horse. The animal reared, throwing him into the mud. As the soldiers hauled him to his feet, Dutch stared at Grace with pure hatred. "You'll pay for this," he snarled. "No," Grace said calmly. "You'll pay. For every girl you sold, for every life you destroyed. For my father. You'll pay for all of it." Morrison's men took Dutch and his gang away in irons. By noon, Word came that Judge Thornton had been arrested at his favorite establishment, caught with his pants quite literally down. Sheriff Wallace tried to flee but was captured at the stage depot. As the dust settled, Samuel found Grace sitting on the porch steps, the first truly peaceful expression he'd seen on her face. "It's over," she said, wonderment in her voice. "This part is," Samuel agreed, sitting beside her. "But there's still the trial. You'll have to testify." "I know, but I'm not afraid anymore." She looked at him. What happens now after the trial? Samuel thought of the night before, of kissing her among the cottonwoods with stolen evidence in their hands, of how alive he'd felt for the first time in 3 years. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "the ranch could use a school teacher. Lots of families around here, children who need education, if you were interested." Grace smiled. "I lost my teaching certificate. Remember?" "We'll get you another one. I know people in Denver." "And where would this school teacher live?" Samuel's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. "Wherever she wanted, though the ranch house has plenty of room." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." As the sun climbed higher over the Double M Ranch, Samuel McKenna held the hand of the woman who'd brought him back to life. The ledgers would convict Dutch and his conspirators. The girls still trapped would be freed. Justice would be done. But here, in this moment, what mattered was simply two people who'd found each other in darkness, choosing to walk together into the light. The plan came together over coffee and maps spread across Samuel's dining table. Grace, Samuel, Jake, and Captain Morrison huddled together as dawn broke over the ranch. "Dutch might be in custody, but we've only cut off one head of the snake," Morrison said. "According to these ledgers, there's a whole network. Buyers, transporters, corrupt officials in 3 territories." "The other girls," Grace said urgently. "The ones already sold, we have to find them." Samuel traced routes on the map with his finger. "Dutch mentioned a way station in the mountains. If girls are still being held there—" "It's not in the ledgers," Grace said. "But I heard them talking. There's an abandoned mine about 30 miles north, up near Devil's Canyon. They called it the holding pen." Morrison frowned. "That's rough country, if they've got men up there." "They do," Grace interrupted. "At least 5, maybe more, led by a man named Garrett. He's Dutch's cousin, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous." Samuel studied the map. "I know that area. Hunted elk up there with Margaret's father years ago. There's only one good approach to the mine, but there's an old Shoshone trail that comes in from the back." "You're not thinking of going up there?" Morrison said. It wasn't a question. "Someone has to. Every day we wait, those girls could be moved, or worse." "It's a trap," Jake protested. "Soon as word reaches them about Dutch, they'll be expecting us." Grace stood abruptly. "Then we give them something else to expect." She moved to the window, gazing out at the mountains. "What if they heard Dutch escaped? What if he was heading to the mine with me as his prisoner, planning to sell me directly to cover his losses?" The room fell silent. "Absolutely not," Samuel said. Grace turned to face him. "It's the only way. They know my face. If they see me coming up that trail, hands tied, couple of riders behind me looking like Dutch's men from a distance, they'll open the gates." "It's suicide," Samuel argued. "No," Grace said firmly. "It's bait. While they're focused on me, you and Captain Morrison come in the back way." Morrison rubbed his jaw. "It could work, but the risk—" "Those girls are living the risk every day." Grace said, "I know what that's like. I won't leave them there." Samuel saw the determination in her eyes and knew arguing was useless. The same courage that had helped her survive Dutch's captivity now drove her to help others escape it. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it right. Jake, you'll need 2 men who can pass for Dutch's gang from a distance. Grace, you'll have a hideout gun. And at the first sign of trouble, I'll use it," she finished. They spent the morning preparing. Grace showed Jake and 2 volunteers, Tom Wheeler and Ben Santos, how Dutch's men dressed, walked, carried themselves. Samuel cleaned weapons and studied the mountain trails, trying to remember every detail from those long-ago hunting trips. Martha pulled Grace aside as they prepared to leave. "You be careful, child. That man's just finding his way back to living. Losing you would kill him for good." Grace hugged the older woman. "I'll be careful. We both will." The rescue party split at the foothills. Grace rode in front, hands loosely bound with rope that looked tight but could be slipped in seconds. Tom and Ben flanked her, hats pulled low, playing their parts. Samuel led Morrison and 6 cavalrymen up the treacherous back trail. The abandoned mine sat in a natural bowl surrounded by steep cliffs. As they approached, Grace counted 5 guards visible, probably more inside. The main shaft had been boarded up, but several outbuildings remained barracks, storage sheds, and what looked like a reinforced cabin. "That you, Dutch," a guard called out. "Heard you had some trouble in town." Tom grunted something noncommittal, keeping his head down. They'd counted on the distance and dust to maintain the deception. It worked. The gates opened. Inside the compound, Grace's heart sank. Through the barred windows of the cabin, she could see faces, young women, hollow-eyed and hopeless, at least a dozen, maybe more. Garrett emerged from the main building, a bull of a man with cruel eyes and scarred hands. He looked at Grace with satisfaction. Well, the one that got away. Dutch said you were a fighter." His expression darkened as he studied Tom and Ben more closely. "Wait a minute. You ain't..." Grace slipped the ropes and pulled the hidden derringer from her boot, but Garrett was already moving. He knocked the small gun from her hand and grabbed her throat. "Rangers!" someone shouted. "Coming down the back trail!" Chaos erupted. Tom and Ben threw off their disguises, drawing their guns. The guards scrambled for cover. And through it all, Garrett maintained his grip on Grace's throat, using her as a shield. "Everybody calm down," he roared. "Anybody shoots, she dies." Samuel and Morrison's men poured into the compound from the rear, taking positions behind whatever cover they could find. A Mexican standoff, with Grace caught in the middle. "Let her go, Garrett," Samuel called out, rifle trained on the big man. "It's over. Dutch is finished. The whole operation's done." "Then I got nothing to lose," Garrett snarled. "Maybe I'd take her with me. Dutch always said she was special. Now I see why." Grace could barely breathe, spots dancing in her vision. But she could see Samuel, could see the anguish in his eyes. She couldn't let him lose someone else he cared about. Not again. She went limp, becoming dead weight. Garrett, surprised, loosened his grip for just an instant to adjust. It was enough. Grace drove her elbow hard into his ribs, twisted free, and dove to the ground. The gunshot was impossibly loud. Garrett stood for a moment, looking surprised at the spreading red stain on his chest, then toppled backward. Samuel lowered his smoking rifle, his face carved from stone. "Secure the compound." Morrison ordered his men. "Check every building." Grace pushed herself up, gasping, and found Samuel there, pulling her into his arms. "Don't ever," he said roughly, "do that to me again." "The girls, we'll get 'em, all of them." And they did. 14 young women, some taken months ago, others just days. They emerged from the cabin blinking in the sunlight, barely able to believe their ordeal was over. Among them was Henderson's foreman's daughter, alive but forever changed. As Morrison's men rounded up the remaining guards, Grace moved among the freed women, offering water, blankets, and, most importantly, hope. Samuel watched her work, saw how the girls instinctively trusted her, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd thought lost forever. "She's remarkable," Morrison said, coming to stand beside him. "Not many would risk what she did today." "No," Samuel agreed. "They wouldn't." One of the younger girls, barely 16, clung to Grace's hand. "Will they come for us again?" she whispered. "No, honey," Grace assured her. "The men who took you are going to prison for a long, long time. You're safe now." "But where will we go? I can't. My family thinks I'm ruined. They won't want me back." Grace looked at Samuel, a question in her eyes. He nodded without hesitation. "You'll come to the Double M Ranch first," Grace said. "Rest, recover. Decide what you want to do next. We'll help you find your families if that's what you want, or help you start fresh if that's better. Nobody's ruined. Nobody's less than they were. You survived. That makes you stronger than most." The journey back to the ranch was slow, the rescued women weak from their ordeal. But as they descended from the mountains, something beautiful happened. Word had spread, and people lined the trail ranchers, farmers, townspeople who'd heard about the rescue. They brought food, blankets, offers of help. Mrs. Henderson was there, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her foreman's daughter. Other families had come too, searching the faces of the rescued women for their own lost daughters, sisters, cousins. That evening, the Double M Ranch became a haven. Martha and the other women from neighboring ranches had prepared food, set up beds, arranged for doctors. The rescued girls were bathed, fed, given clean clothes and safe places to sleep. Grace moved among them like a guardian angel, but Samuel could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the bruises on her throat from Garrett's hands. He found her on the porch as evening fell, finally taking a moment to rest. "You should see Doc Morrison," he said, gently touching the marks on her neck. "Later. They need me more right now." "Grace." He sat beside her, took her hand. "You can't save everyone by yourself. You've done enough for today." She leaned against his shoulder, and he felt her trembling, delayed reaction to the day's dangers. "I kept thinking," she said quietly, "what if we'd been too late? What if they'd already been shipped away?" "But they weren't. We saved them. You saved them." "We saved them," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Inside the house, they could hear voices, some crying, some laughing, all free. It was the sound of healing beginning. "What happens to them now?" Grace asked. "Whatever they choose, Morrison says the government will provide some funds for those who want to go home. The ones who don't—" Samuel squeezed her hand. "There's plenty of work on a ranch, and once you get that school started, maybe some will want to learn teaching." Grace turned to look at him. "You meant that about the school?" "I mean everything I say to you," Samuel replied. "This place has been half dead for 3 years. Now it's full of life again. That's because of you." "It's because of us," Grace said softly, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Samuel thought about the twists of fate that had brought them together. If he hadn't taken that particular trail, if he hadn't heard her desperate cry, if she hadn't been brave enough to fight back, to stand up, to risk everything for others. "Samuel," Grace's voice was thoughtful, "that gold Dutch mentioned the story I told to trap them. What if we actually looked for it, not for us, but for them, to help the girls start over?" Samuel smiled. "There's no gold up there. Grace, those mountains have been picked clean for decades." "I know. But there's the reward money for Dutch's capture, and what Morrison said about government funds, and if some of the local ranchers contributed." She sat up straighter, eyes brightening with plans. "We could create a fund, help these women and others like them, make sure they have choices." Looking at her bruised but unbroken, exhausted but still planning how to help others, Samuel made a decision. "Marry me," he said. Grace went very still. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready. Help me make this ranch what it should be. A place of second chances, a home for those who need it, a school for children who deserve education. Build a life with me. Grace Patterson." She was crying now, but smiling through the tears. "Yes," she whispered. Yes to all of it. As Samuel kissed her there on the porch, with the rescued women safe inside and the stars wheeling overhead, he felt Margaret's blessing like a warm wind. She would have wanted this life continuing, love renewed, hope restored. The trap had been sprung, but not the one Dutch and his men had planned. Instead, Grace and Samuel had trapped something else entirely, a future worth fighting for. The federal judge arrived from Denver on a Tuesday morning, bringing with him 2 U.S. Marshals and a court reporter. Judge Harold Beaumont was everything Thornton hadn't been: honest, thorough, and immune to bribery. He set up court in Cheyenne's town hall, and word had spread quickly that justice had finally come to Wyoming. Samuel helped Grace from the wagon in front of the courthouse. She wore a simple blue dress that Martha had altered for her, her hair pulled back severely. She looked every inch the respectable woman, but Samuel could see her hands trembling slightly. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I do. Grace's chin lifted. Those ledgers tell part of the story. I need to tell the rest. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Ranchers, townspeople, even some of the rescued women had come to witness. Dutch Williams sat shackled at the defendant's table, his scarred eyebrow twitching with suppressed rage. Beside him, former Judge Thornton looked pale and deflated, his pompous authority stripped away. Sheriff Wallace and 6 other men filled out the defendant's bench. The United States versus Williams, Thornton, Wallace, et al. Judge Beaumont intoned, charges include kidnapping, human trafficking, corruption of public office, and conspiracy. The prosecutor, a sharp young man named David Harper, called Grace as his first witness. As she took the stand, Samuel saw Dutch lean forward, eyes burning with hatred. State your name for the record, Harper began. Grace Patterson. Miss Patterson, please tell the court how you came to be in the custody of the defendant Dutch Williams. Grace's voice started soft but grew stronger as she spoke. She told of the wagon train attack, her father's murder, the weeks of captivity. The courtroom sat in horrified silence as she described the conditions, the other women who'd disappeared, the casual cruelty of men who saw human beings as merchandise. Can you identify the men responsible? Harper asked. Yes. Grace pointed at each defendant in turn. Dutch Williams led the gang. Judge Thornton provided legal protection and forged ownership papers. Sheriff Wallace arrested anyone who asked too many questions about missing girls. Objection, Thornton's lawyer, a nervous man from Denver, stood up. Hearsay and speculation. Overruled, Judge Beaumont said coldly. The witness is testifying to her direct experience. Continue. Miss Patterson. For 2 hours, Grace testified. She named names, dates, places. She identified entries in Dutch's ledgers, matching them to girls she'd known. She spoke of overhearing Dutch and Thornton planning shipments, of Wallace visiting the camp to collect his payment. When Harper finished, Dutch's lawyer, a slick operator named Randolph Cross, stood for cross-examination. Miss Patterson, Cross said smoothly. Isn't it true you were, shall we say, working in a saloon when Mr. Williams first encountered you? No, Grace said clearly. I was traveling to California to teach school when his men murdered my father and kidnapped me. But you have no proof of this alleged teaching certificate. Do you? No family to verify your claims. My family is dead because your client killed them, Grace replied, her voice steady despite the provocation. Cross changed tactics. You've been living at the McKenna Ranch for several weeks now, unchaperoned with a single man. Some might say, Counselor, Judge Beaumont's gavel came down hard. You will confine yourself to questions relevant to the charges. The witness's current living arrangements have no bearing on whether she was kidnapped and held against her will. But Cross had planted his seed of doubt. Samuel saw some of the townspeople shifting uncomfortably, whispering. The old prejudices died hard a woman's virtue, once questioned, colored everything else. The prosecutor called the rescued women next. One by one, they took the stand. Mary Collins from Nebraska, aged 17. Sarah Winters from Kansas, 19. Amy Chen, daughter of railroad workers, barely 16. Each told their story, and with each testimony, the case against Dutch and his accomplices grew stronger. But it was the testimony of Catherine Mills that provided the breakthrough. A mousy woman in her 30s. She had worked as Thornton's housekeeper until her conscience got the better of her. "I saw the ledgers," she testified. "Saw the judge counting money with Mr. Williams. Heard them laughing about fooling the righteous fools who thought the law meant something." "Did you see any documentation of these transactions?" Harper asked. Catherine nodded. "The judge kept copies of everything. Said insurance was important in his line of work. There's a hidden compartment in his desk behind the bottom drawer. He didn't know I knew about it." Judge Beaumont immediately ordered a search of Thornton's home. Within hours, marshals returned with boxes of evidence contracts for servants, bills of sale with prices paid for human beings, correspondence with buyers from San Francisco to New Orleans. The most damning was a letter from Thornton to a buyer in San Francisco. "The new merchandise is of exceptional quality, young, healthy, and properly broken. Your specifications for fair-haired stock will be met by month's end." The courtroom erupted. Women wept. Men shouted for immediate hanging. Judge Beaumont gavelled for order repeatedly before threatening to clear the room. Dutch suddenly stood, chains rattling. "I want to make a deal." His lawyer tried to quiet him, but Dutch shoved him aside. "I know where more girls are. There's another camp, down in Colorado. 20 girls, maybe more. I'll tell you where for a reduced sentence." The courtroom exploded again. Grace felt Samuel's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she swayed in her seat. Judge Beaumont restored order. "Mr. Williams, any information you provide will be verified. If you're lying—" "I ain't lying. Ask Wallace, he knows." Sheriff Wallace went white. "I don't know nothing about Colorado." "Shut up, you fool," Dutch snarled. "It's over. At least we can save ourselves some rope." In the end, both Dutch and Wallace provided information about the Colorado operation in exchange for life sentences instead of hanging. The revelations led to arrests in 3 states and the rescue of 18 more women. Judge Thornton, faced with overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his co-conspirators, maintained his innocence to the end. "I was enforcing contracts," he declared as sentence was pronounced. "These women made choices." "The only choice they made," Judge Beaumont interrupted, "was to trust the wrong people. This court finds all defendants guilty on all charges." The sentences came down like hammer blows. Dutch Williams and his main accomplices life in federal prison. Thornton 25 years and permanent disbarment. Wallace and the others 15 to 20 years. As the defendants were led away in chains, Dutch managed to turn toward Grace one last time. "This ain't over, girl," he hissed. "I got friends. You'll never be safe." Samuel stood, placing himself between Dutch and Grace. "She'll be safer than you," he said quietly. "I guarantee it." Outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered as the prison wagon rolled away. The rescued women embraced each other, tears of relief mixing with lingering grief for all they'd lost. Captain Morrison found Samuel and Grace on the courthouse steps. "Well done, both of you. The Army's grateful. The whole territory's grateful." "What happens now?" Grace asked. "To the women. I mean, there's a victims fund being established. Church groups are organizing support. Some have families to return to. Others—" Morrison shrugged. "They'll find their way. Thanks to you." That evening, back at the ranch, they held a celebration of sorts. Nothing elaborate, Martha's good cooking and quiet conversation. Some of the rescued women were there, making plans. Mary Collins had decided to continue to California. Sarah Winters was returning to her aunt in Kansas. Amy Chen surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study law. "If women could be lawyers," she said defiantly, "maybe this wouldn't happen so much." "Women can't be lawyers," someone said. "Not yet," Amy replied. But things change. Grace smiled at that. Things did change. She was proof of it. Later, she found Samuel alone on the porch, staring out at the stars. "Regrets?" she asked, settling beside him. "None. You—" "Only that we couldn't save them all? The ones sold before we stopped it?" Samuel took her hand. "We saved who we could, and the trial transcript will be published in newspapers across the country. Maybe it'll make the next Dutch Williams think twice. Or maybe it'll just make them more careful," Grace said sadly. "Maybe, but it'll also make good people more watchful. And it proved something important, that justice can win, even against corruption and money and violence." Grace leaned against his shoulder. "Dutch's threat, do you think he meant it?" "Probably. Men like him don't forgive. But men like him also don't have as many friends as they think. Prison has a way of clarifying loyalties." "I'm not afraid," Grace said, and realized she meant it. "Whatever comes, we'll face it." "Together," Samuel agreed. Inside the house, they could hear the voices of the women, planning their futures with hope instead of fear. It was the sound of victory, Grace thought, not the cheering crowds or the judge's gavel, but these quiet conversations about tomorrow. "When should we have the wedding?" Samuel asked suddenly. Grace smiled in the darkness. "After everyone's settled, after the school is built, when life is normal again." "Life's never normal on a ranch," Samuel warned. "Then when it's our kind of normal," Grace amended. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in darkness and fought their way to light. The trial was over. Justice served. But Grace knew Samuel was right. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still women to help home, a school to build, a ranch to run, a life to create together. But tonight, with the stars wheeling overhead and Samuel's hand warm in hers, Grace allowed herself to believe in happily ever after. She'd earned it. They both had. In the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered. But the sound no longer seemed threatening. It was just the voice of the wild, calling to its own. And here on the Double M Ranch, surrounded by friends and chosen family, Grace had found her own pack, her own place, her own home. The trap had been sprung, the guilty punished, and justice served. Now, finally, it was time to live. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, melting the snow from the high passes and painting the valleys with wildflowers. The Double M Ranch bustled with activity as Samuel directed the construction of the new schoolhouse, its frame rising against the clear blue sky like a promise of the future. Grace stood in what would be the main classroom, holding architectural plans that rustled in the morning breeze. 6 months had passed since the trial, 6 months of healing and building and slowly learning to trust in tomorrow. "The windows should face east," she told the carpenter, Mr. Olson. "Children learn better with morning light." "Yes, ma'am," Olson agreed, making notes. "My own young ones are mighty excited about having a real school. Been practicing their letters already." Through the window frame, Grace could see riders approaching. Samuel, returning from town with Jake, and her heart leapt a woman in a familiar blue traveling dress. Amy Grace ran out to meet them as Amy Chen dismounted, laughing. "I told you I'd come back for the wedding," Amy said, embracing her. "And I have news. The territorial legislature is considering allowing women to practice law. Can you imagine? After everything you've been through, you still want to fight?" Grace asked. "Because of everything I've been through," Amy corrected. "Someone needs to stand for women who can't stand for themselves." Samuel dismounted, smiling at Grace's joy. Found her at the stage depot arguing with the driver about women's suffrage. Some things never change. "Some things do," Grace said, taking his hand. "The school will be finished by month's end. We've already got 22 students enrolled." 23, Martha announced, appearing with a letter. "The Hendersons' nephew is moving here with his family. 3 more children for your school." Grace read the letter, her smile widening. It was from Sarah Winters, safe with her aunt in Kansas. She'd opened a small shop and was engaged to a local merchant. "A good man," she wrote, "who knows my past and loves my future." "Any word from Mary?" Amy asked. "She made it to San Francisco," Samuel said. "Started work at a hospital there. Says she's thinking about studying to be a nurse." They'd kept track of all the rescued women, a network of letters and telegraph messages spanning half the continent. Each success story was a victory against the darkness they'd survived. That evening, the ranch filled with neighbors come to help with wedding preparations. The ceremony would be simple. Grace insisted on that, but the entire community wanted to celebrate. Women brought quilts they'd made. Men offered livestock for the feast, and children practiced songs for the occasion. Old man Henderson pulled Samuel aside. "Been thinking," he said gruffly. "That fund you and Miss Grace started for helping women in trouble. I want to contribute. Make it a yearly thing." "John, that's generous, but—" "No buts. My foreman's girl is alive because of what you did. That's worth more than money." As sunset approached, Samuel found Grace in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. She stood before 2 graves, Margaret and Emma McKenna, their stones weathered but well tended. "I wanted to pay my respects," Grace said softly. "To thank them." "Thank them." "For loving you first, for making you the man who saved me." She placed wildflowers on each grave. "I promised to take care of him," she whispered. Samuel's throat tightened. "They would have loved you." "I hope so." Grace turned to him. "Do you think they'd approve of us?" "I know they would." Samuel touched the wedding ring he still wore. Tomorrow, he'd move it to his right hand, making room for a new ring, a new promise. Margaret always said the heart was made for loving, not for grieving. They walked back to the house, hand in hand, past the nearly completed school, past the corrals where Jake was training a new colt, past the garden where Martha grew vegetables and healing herbs. The Double M had become more than a ranch. It was a haven, a place of second chances. The next morning dawned crystal clear, the mountains etched sharp against the sky. Grace woke early, nerves and excitement fluttering in her stomach. Amy and Martha helped her dress in a simple white gown, nothing fancy, but clean and new and hers. "You're beautiful," Amy declared. "Samuel's a lucky man." "We're both lucky," Grace corrected. "To have found each other, to have survived to find each other." The ceremony took place in the meadow behind the house, wildflowers serving as decoration. Captain Morrison stood as Samuel's best man, while Amy served as Grace's maid of honor. The rescued women who could attend sat in the front row, living proof that love could bloom after trauma. Reverend Patterson, no relation, despite the name, spoke simply about redemption and renewal, about 2 people choosing to build a future on the ashes of the past. When he asked if anyone objected, a meadowlark trilled from a nearby cottonwood, making everyone laugh. "Do you, Samuel McKenna, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Reverend asked. "I do," Samuel said, his voice strong and certain. "Do you, Grace Patterson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Grace whispered, then louder. "I do." The ring Samuel slipped onto her finger had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band worn smooth by years of work and love. Grace's gift to him was new, purchased with her first earnings from teaching private lessons to ranch children while the school was being built. "By the power vested in me by Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Samuel's kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise made before friends and mountains and sky. The crowd erupted in cheers, cowboys firing pistols into the air while women dabbed at tears. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under Martha's cooking and contributions from neighbors. Jake and the hands had constructed a dance floor of smooth planks, and couples whirled to fiddle music as stars emerged overhead. "No regrets," Samuel asked as they danced, Grace's head on his shoulder. "Only one," she said. "I wish my father could have met you." "He would have approved." "He knows," Samuel said simply. "Somewhere, he knows." As midnight approached, the newlyweds slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand to the little hill that overlooked their domain. The double M spread out below them, the ranch house glowing with lamplight, the new school standing proud, the vast rangeland stretching to the horizon. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked. Samuel pulled her close. "That Dutch Williams did me a favor, leaving you in that shack where I'd find you, though I'd never tell him that." Grace laughed. "He's got 20 years to think about his mistakes. I hope every day he remembers that the woman he tried to break ended up with everything: love, home, purpose, freedom." "Justice," Samuel added. "The best kind," Grace agreed. "A life well lived." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Grace made a wish not for herself, but for all the women still trapped, still fighting, still hoping. Tomorrow she'd begin teaching in earnest, shaping young minds and, perhaps, changing the future one student at a time. Amy would fight for women's legal rights. Mary would heal the sick. Sarah would run her shop, each of them carrying forward the light from their darkness. "Ready to go home, Mrs. McKenna?" Samuel asked. "I am home," Grace said, and kissed him under the vast Wyoming sky. Below them, the wedding party continued, laughter and music drifting on the night wind. The Double M Ranch stood strong against the darkness, a beacon of hope in a harsh land. Here, broken things were mended, lost souls found shelter, love conquered fear. The schoolhouse bell, not yet hung in its tower, lay waiting to summon children to learn. The morning would bring new challenges, new students, new chances to make a difference. But tonight was for celebrating the end of one story and the beginning of another. Grace Patterson. McKenna looked at her husband, at her home, at the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, and knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd cried, "I can't breathe," in a dusty shack, had found her voice, her strength, her purpose, and, in the end, that was the greatest justice of all. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just escaping the trap, but building something beautiful in freedom. The coyotes called from the distant hills, but their song no longer spoke of loneliness. Instead, it seemed to Grace like a celebration. Wild voices raised in acknowledgement of all that was possible when love met courage in the untamed heart of the West. Dawn would come, as dawn always did. But for now, in this perfect moment between their past and their future, Samuel and Grace McKenna stood together, whole and healed and home. Thank you for listening to our Wild West love story. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, justice, and romance in the American frontier, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Grace and Samuel's journey. Your support helps us bring more authentic Western stories to life.